So you want to be a museum director, huh? That's awesome. You clearly love art and history, but you also want the inside scoop on this career path.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, you've come to the right place. We're doing a deep dive into this really comprehensive career guide. It's full of insights.
This guide is great. It really digs deep into what it actually takes to be a museum director and to be successful at it.
Love it. Okay, so let's get right into it. What does a museum director actually do all day?
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be more than just, hanging out with, like, priceless Picassos all day, right?
Way more. This guide really stresses that you need like a good balance of creativity and business skills.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you're not just managing a collection. You're managing finances, you're fundraising. You're even like making tough decisions about it, buying or even selling pieces from the museum's collection.
Wait, museums actually sell pieces from their collection?
Yeah.
I had no idea. Why would they ever do that?
Right. So it's called deaccessioning, and it's actually a really controversial topic.
I bet.
Yeah. The guide says you should only think about doing it under really specific circumstances.
Okay.
Like if a piece doesn't really fit with the museum's overall mission anymore.
Right?
Or like if the museum needs to sell a piece to get the money to acquire like a different, more important piece of art.
I see.
It's a tough job. It's a balancing act, for sure.
That's wild. It's like running a business, but instead of widgets, you're dealing with, priceless artifacts.
Exactly. And the guide actually calls it a collections management policy.
Oh.
And it really stresses how important that is for keeping the museum, financially healthy.
That's fascinating. There's so much more to it than I think people realize. Right.
So it's not just enough to, love art. You need some serious business skills to make it in this field.
Absolutely. And museums are really facing a lot of financial pressures these days.
I bet.
Yeah. This guide really doesn't sugarcoat that.
Yeah.
It talks about the realities of, tight budgets and how museums constantly need to find new ways to, make money.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Like they even talk about things like, renting out the museum for like private events.
Yeah.
Or doing partnerships with businesses in the local community.
That makes sense. So it sounds like museum directors really need to be like exceptional leaders too.
Totally. They have to manage all these different teams, from the curators to the people who work with the art every day, to the marketing people, to the development people who are out there getting the money.
Right.
You know?
It's a big, yeah. The guide used this phrase that I thought was really interesting. It's like they have to have an audience engagement strategy.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. It's really about engaging the public.
So it's almost like conducting an orchestra, right? You got to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
So that the whole museum, runs smoothly and it's a good experience for the visitor.
Right.
Speaking of visitors, what's that day-to-day work environment actually like?
Yeah.
I guess there's got to be long hours. I imagine you probably have to deal with some interesting personalities.
You're right about that.
Right? Some big-time art collectors who like to, make things difficult.
Yeah. The guide definitely paints a pretty realistic picture of what it's like to work in a museum.
Yeah.
You're surrounded by amazing art and history and artifacts, but it's a demanding job. It's a lot of work, long hours, tight deadlines.
Yeah.
And you constantly have to prove that the museum is worth investing in.
I see.
You have to get people to come in and actually visit these museums.
So it's not all, fancy gallery openings and champagne receptions.
No,
Yeah.
not exactly.
Right.
It's more like late nights installing exhibitions.
Yeah.
And like last-minute emergency meetings with donors.
I bet.
But the guide emphasizes that to really thrive in this environment, you really have to be passionate about art and history, and you got to be willing to work hard.
Right. You got to love it.
You do.
Okay, so let's say someone's really interested in becoming a museum director. How do they break into this field?
Yeah.
Does everyone just start at the very bottom and work their way up?
That's one way to do it. And the guide actually lays out kind of like the different stages of a museum career.
Cool.
It really stresses that it's important to start with entry-level jobs. Like a lot of people start out as like a museum assistant.
Interesting.
Yeah, you get that hands-on experience.
What does that actually involve? What does a museum assistant do all day?
Right. So you could be helping out with setting up exhibitions or maybe even like handling artifacts.
Hold on, handling artifacts.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So that could mean anything from carefully dusting off a really old vase
Yeah.
to using like high-tech equipment to help preserve something.
Wow.
It really depends on the museum and the artifact itself.
Right, of course.
But usually you're going to be doing things like cataloging them, taking pictures of them,
Yeah.
or even just like preparing them to be stored or put on display.
So it's a lot of responsibility.
Huge responsibility.
Wow.
But it's also an amazing opportunity to really learn about, art and history and museums.
That's got to be really cool to actually like get to be up close and personal with some of these pieces of history.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that kind of experience that you get from an entry-level job,
Right.
that's what you need to eventually move up that museum career ladder.
I see.
And a lot of times that means, becoming a curator,
Yeah.
someone who specializes in a very specific area of like art or history.
So you could go from handling these artifacts to being like the leading expert on them.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the guide really emphasizes that getting a master's degree in museum studies can be a huge advantage if you want to work your way up and specialize.
A master's in museum studies. That sounds fascinating. A master's in museum studies. That's so cool. You mentioned earlier that the guide also talks about networking.
Yeah.
Why is that so important in the museum world?
Well, museums aren't just buildings. They're like communities.
That's a good way to put it.
A whole network of people who are really passionate about like preserving cultural heritage and sharing it with the world.
So it's not just like, going to those stuffy conferences and like handing out your business card to everyone.
No. It's way more than that.
Okay.
It's about going to those conferences. The guide specifically mentions going to the American Alliance of Museums annual meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Or joining organizations like the Association of Art Museum Directors.
Right.
These are really great opportunities to learn from other people in the field, to share your ideas, to meet people.
Make those connections.
Exactly. And you never know, those connections could lead to a job opportunity one day.
It's all about who you know.
Sometimes, yeah.
That reminds me, actually, you've had a pretty incredible career in the museum world.
It's been fun.
Was there like a specific moment in your career where you were just like, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to be doing?
It's funny you mention that because it actually happened at one of those conferences.
No way.
Yeah.
Get out.
I was just starting out and I was presenting some of my research.
Cool.
And I met this curator and they were a leading expert in their field.
Wow.
And they were really interested in my work. We had a great conversation and they gave me some really great advice. And that just kind of lit a fire under me.
It's amazing how those things happen.
I know. Right.
Like you never know who you're going to meet.
It's true.
And what they're going to say, that's going to like completely change your life.
Right. And that's why networking is so important. You just never know.
So the guide talks about some of the challenges of being a museum director. It's not all sunshine and roses, right?
Right. Of course not. Every job has its challenges.
Right. What are some of the things that people might not expect?
Well, the guide talks about the long hours, the tight budgets, and the constant pressure to get people to actually come to the museum.
Yeah. You're always fundraising, right?
Always.
Trying to get people to donate.
But then there are the unexpected things that come up, too.
Oh, like what? Like a fire-breathing dragon gets loose in the Egyptian exhibit?
Yeah, not quite like that. But I do remember this one time.
What?
I can't say who was involved or which museum, but I'll never forget it.
Okay.
Picture this. A huge exhibition, years in the making, about to open to the public.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
And at the very last minute, the most important piece in the whole exhibition gets held up in customs.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine?
What did they do?
Everyone was freaking out.
Yeah.
But the museum director was amazing. They were so calm and collected.
Wow.
They got their team together. They worked all night.
No way.
And they actually found this incredible replacement piece from a private collector.
That's amazing.
It was unbelievable.
Talk about thinking on your feet.
I know, right?
So that's a great example of like the kind of unexpected challenge that the guide talks about.
Yeah. You really have to be adaptable in this job.
And you need to have a good team.
Absolutely. The guide actually calls it crisis management. And they stress that you can't do everything yourself.
Totally. You got to delegate.
Yeah, you need to be able to rely on the people around you.
So you're not just a leader, you're a problem solver.
That's a good way to put it.
You're an advocate for the arts.
Well, it's all part of the job.
Let's talk about the visitor experience for a second. I imagine museums are always looking for new ways to use technology to make things more exciting for visitors.
Absolutely. That's a huge focus these days.
Right.
And the guide actually has a whole section on using technology in museums.
Cool. What does it say?
Well, it's not just about having, like, a bunch of touch screens everywhere.
Okay.
It's really about using technology in a way that enhances the visitor experience.
Right.
It shouldn't be a distraction from the art.
I
It
see.
should make people appreciate the art even more.
So it's all about finding that balance between like the traditional museum experience and then bringing in these new technologies.
For example, the guide talks about using augmented reality to bring paintings to life,
Oh, that's cool.
or even using virtual reality to create immersive historical experiences.
Wow. You could literally step back in time.
It's amazing what they can do with technology these days.
That's really cool.
It is. And as technology continues to evolve, it's up to museum directors to stay ahead of the curve,
Right.
to make sure that their museums are exciting and engaging for visitors.
So being a museum director now is a lot different than it was like 50 years ago.
Oh,
And should really changed.
Yeah, it's a constantly evolving field.
That makes it even more interesting though, right?
Speaking of interesting, the guide brought up something that I think is so important for us aspiring museum directors to think about.
Okay, so what is it? What's so important for aspiring museum directors?
Accessibility.
Accessibility.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm not just talking about, like wheelchair ramps and having audio guides available.
Right, of course.
Those are important. But the guide is talking about something much bigger.
Mhm.
It's about making museums welcoming and inclusive for literally everyone.
That makes sense. I mean, the guide has been kind of hinting at that all along, right? Like
Yeah.
when it talked about how important it is for museums to like diversify their income streams
Right.
and how they can use technology to reach new audiences. It's all connected.
It is. It's all about breaking down those barriers,
Right.
both the physical ones and the ones that people just have in their minds.
The guide gave that example of having free admission days.
Right.
Or like partnering with community groups to reach people who might not normally go to museums.
It's about making sure that everyone feels like they belong in these spaces.
That's really cool. I like that a lot.
And it's not about, just being politically correct or whatever.
Right.
It's about making the museum better for everyone.
How so?
Well, the guide says that when you have all these different voices and perspectives represented in a museum,
Yeah.
it leads to new conversations and new ideas and new ways of looking at the world.
It's like you're holding up a mirror to the community
Yeah,
and
exactly.
reflecting like all the different people and ideas and stories back to them.
And that brings us back to you
Me
Right.
as a future museum director.
as a future museum director, right?
Yeah.
This guide has given you all the tools you need to succeed. But at the end of the day, it's your vision and your passion that are going to make the difference.
Yo, pressure, right?
It's a big responsibility, but it's also an amazing opportunity.
So what's like the one piece of advice that you would give to someone who wants to be a museum director?
The guide used this phrase that really stuck with me. It called a museum director a bridge builder.
A bridge builder? What does that even mean?
Well, think about it. A museum director connects the past to the present.
Okay.
They connect art to technology.
I see.
They connect the museum to the rest of the world.
It's all about making connections.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's about finding new and creative ways to make museums interesting and engaging for everyone.
Bridge builder. I love that. I think that's a perfect way to describe it.
Me too.
It's not just one job. It's like you're doing a million different things all at once.
You're a curator. You're a leader. You're a financial expert. You're a diplomat.
You're a bridge builder.
That's the one.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
We did. We really dug deep into this career guide.
And to all the future museum directors out there, remember this. It's not just about the past. It's about the future.
That's right.
What kind of museum are you going to build? What stories are you going to tell?
Good question.
What bridges are you going to build? Keep asking yourself those questions, and I know you're going to do great things. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.